It was a gray afternoon in Chicago when Vincent Caruso parked his black Mercedes in front of the Italian restaurant that served as a front for his business. The 52-year-old, known on the streets as the Wolf, had built an empire through decades of intimidation, shady dealings, and a reputation that made grown men tremble at the mere mention of his name. His hands, adorned with solid gold rings, held the car keys as he adjusted the Armani suit that cost more than most people earned in 6 months. Vincent was a meticulous man. Every move was calculated. Every word weighed before leaving his mouth. He hadn't risen to the top of Chicago's criminal hierarchy by being careless. His enemies had learned the hard way that underestimating Vincent Caruso was the last mistake anyone could make. The Bellinore restaurant had belonged to his family for 3 generations, but now it served far darker purposes than simply feeding hungry customers. As he walked toward the entrance of the side building, mentally preparing himself for the meeting that would decide the fate of a disputed territory in the south of the city, a high-pitched voice cut through the air like a crystal bell. It was a child, no more than 7 or 8 years old, with disheveled brown hair and a faded pink dress that had seen better days. His shoes were worn, with holes in the sides, and there was a stain of dirt on his left cheek. Sir, please." The girl ran towards him, her eyes wide with an urgency that seemed disproportionate to her size. Vincent stopped immediately, his hand instinctively moving inside his jacket, where he kept a loaded gun. His bodyguards, 2 enormous men dressed in black who followed him like shadows, stepped forward, forming a human barrier between the boss and the child. "Stay away, girl," growled Tony, the taller of the 2 security guards, his voice sounding like crushed gravel. But the girl didn't back down. Instead, she tried to push past the men, her small arms waving frantically. "Please, it's important. Look under your car. You need to look now." Vincent gestured with his hand, and his men retreated slightly, though they maintained their defensive positions. There was something in the child's voice, a raw sincerity that pierced through the layers of cynicism and distrust that Vincent had built up over the years. He lowered himself slightly, getting closer to the girl's eye level, studying her face with the intensity of a predator assessing prey. "What did you say about my car?" Her voice was soft, but there was a sharp edge hidden within it, like velvet covering a blade. The girl swallowed hard, but maintained eye contact, displaying a courage that impressed Vincent despite himself. "I saw some men underneath it. They were messing with something. They looked bad. My mother always told me to let her know when I see strange things." A heavy silence fell over the group. The bodyguards exchanged meaningful glances, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. Vincent felt a chill run down his spine, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. He had survived 5 assassination attempts throughout his career, and his instinct, that same instinct that had kept him alive while so many others fell, was screaming that the girl was telling the truth. "When did you see them?" Vincent asked, his voice now completely devoid of emotion, entering the operational mode he assumed when his life was in danger. The girl pointed to a narrow alley across the street. "About 10 minutes ago. They ran out when they were done. There were 3 of them. One of them had a big scar here." She traced an imaginary line from the left side of her forehead to her cheek. Vincent recognized the description immediately. Dmitry Volkov, an enforcer for the Russian Mafia, who was trying to expand his territory to the west side of Chicago. Tensions between the Italian and Russian organizations had escalated in recent weeks, but Vincent hadn't expected such a bold, direct move. A bomb in his car was a declaration of war, not just against him, but against his entire family. "Tony, call the security team. Marco, check the perimeter. No one enters or leaves within a 3-block radius until I say otherwise." His orders were given with the precision of a general on the battlefield. The men immediately dispersed, speaking urgently on their cell phones and radios. Vincent turned his attention to the girl, who now seemed smaller and more vulnerable than before. Her shoulders hunched as if the weight of the situation had finally caught up with her. "What's your name?" Vincent asked, his voice softening slightly. The girl wiped her nose with the back of her hand. Emily Morrison. I live over there." She pointed to a dilapidated building 3 doors down, its cracked windows covered with plastic and tape. It was the kind of place where people lived when all other options had been exhausted, where children grew up too fast and dreams died slowly. Vincent studied the building for a moment, calculating, always calculating. Then he turned his attention to Emily. "You saved my life today, Emily Morrison. That's no small thing. In fact, it's a debt I'll take very seriously." The girl blinked, confusion evident in her delicate features. She probably didn't fully understand the magnitude of what she had done, nor the ripples her simple action would create in Chicago's criminal underworld. 10 minutes later, Vincent's expert team had confirmed the worst suspicions. A sophisticated explosive charge was strapped to the Mercedes chassis, connected to the vehicle's ignition system. The bomb was professionally designed, well hidden, and would have vaporized not only Vincent, but probably half the block when it detonated. The explosives expert, a former soldier named Jackson, who now worked exclusively for the Caruso organization, whistled softly as he disarmed the device with steady hands. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing," Jackson murmured as he carefully cut colored wires. "Military C4, mercury detonator, cell backup. If you'd flipped the switch, there wouldn't have been time to even notice. It was a clean professional job. These guys weren't amateurs." Vincent watched silently, his thoughts already moving 3 steps ahead, planning his response, considering the ramifications. Emily had remained throughout the entire process, seated on the curb at a safe distance, her thin legs dangling in the air. Vincent realized she was alone, with no adults nearby to supervise or worry about her whereabouts. Something about this bothered the crime boss in a way he couldn't quite articulate. He had seen many horrific things in his life, had ordered operations that kept decent people awake at night, but had always maintained one inviolable rule: children were off limits. When the bomb was finally removed and placed in a special container for disposal, Vincent walked over to where Emily was sitting. The girl looked up, shielding her eyes from the afternoon sun that had finally broken through the gray clouds. "Can I go home now?" she asked in a small voice. Vincent sat down beside her on the curb, an action that visibly made his bodyguards nervous. A man in his position didn't sit on public curbs. "In a minute," Vincent said. "First, I need to ask you a few questions. Where is your mother?" Emily looked at the floor, her fingers playing with a loose thread at the hem of her dress. "Working. She has 3 jobs. She cleans offices in the morning, works at a laundromat in the afternoon, and cleans at a hotel at night. I almost never see her awake." "And your father?" Vincent already knew the answer before even asking. Emily shrugged, a gesture laden with the resignation of someone who had learned not to expect much from life. "I never met him. My mother says he left before I was born. She doesn't talk much about him." Vincent felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he had long since buried beneath layers of necessary brutality and cold pragmatism. He thought of his own daughter, Sophia, now 23 and studying law at Harvard, carefully kept away from the darker aspects of her father's business. Sophia had never known hunger, never worn shoes with holes, never been alone on dangerous streets, because her mother was working desperately to keep them alive. "Do you have any brothers or sisters?" Vincent continued his gentle questioning. Emily shook her head. "No, just me. And Mom. Sometimes I'm alone for too long. That's why I stay outside. It's better than staying in the apartment. Inside it's dark and noisy at night. People fighting, things breaking. It's scary." Vincent motioned to Tony, who immediately approached. "I need complete information on Emily Morrison and her mother. The mother's full name, where she works, financial history, anything you can find. And I want it in an hour." Tony nodded and walked away, already dialing his phone. Vincent turned his attention back to the girl beside him. "Emily, do you know who I am?" The question was a test, a way to assess how much the child understood about the world around her. Emily looked at him with those big, honest eyes. "A rich man, I think. Because of the nice car and the elegant clothes. And those big men are around you all the time, so you must be important." Vincent almost smiled. There was a certain refreshing innocence in his assessment, devoid of the fear and intimidation that usually accompanied people who knew their true role in the city. "You're right about me being important. And because you helped me today, because you were brave enough to warn me when you didn't need to, I'll make sure you and your mother are taken care of." Emily frowned, confusion crossing her features. "What does this mean?" Vincent stood up, extending his hand to help the girl to her feet as well. "It means your life is about to change, Emily Morrison, for the much better." In the weeks that followed the incident, dramatic changes swept through the lives of Emily and her mother, Sarah Morrison. Vincent had kept his word in a way that far exceeded any reasonable expectation. Sarah, a 31-year-old woman who looked 45, due to years of exhausting work and constant worry, initially refused the help when men in suits showed up at her miserable apartment with a proposition. "I don't accept charity," she had said with wounded pride, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. But the man speaking for Vincent was persistent and persuasive. "This isn't charity, Mrs. Morrison. Your daughter has rendered an invaluable service to Mr. Caruso. He's simply repaying her in the way he can. To refuse would be frankly an insult." Sarah Morrison was many things. Proud, stubborn, exhausted to the bone, but she wasn't a fool. She recognized a lifeline when she saw one, even if it came from a questionable source. And so, against all her instincts, she took it. A spacious apartment. In a safe neighborhood replaced the cockroach-infested cubicle where they had lived. It wasn't extravagant, but it was clean, safe, with heating that worked in the winter and windows that actually closed. Sarah was also offered a single, well-paid job, managing the office at one of Vincent's legitimate businesses, an import-export company that served as a cover for more questionable operations. The work was real, the responsibilities legitimate, and the salary allowed her to finally breathe, without the constant weight of financial drowning pressing on her chest. Emily was enrolled in a private school, where uniforms replaced her worn-out clothes, and dedicated teachers replaced overcrowded classrooms, where no one had time to notice a quiet child in the back. The transformation in the girl was remarkable. Beneath the layer of dirt and neglect imposed by poverty, there was a sharp and curious mind, a child who flourished when given the most basic resources and attention. But Vincent hadn't forgotten the other part of the equation, the men who had planted the bomb in his car. Retribution came swiftly and completely, executed with the brutal efficiency for which the Caruso organization was known. Dmitry Volkov and his 2 associates vanished on a moonless night, their bodies never found, their families in Russia receiving stark messages about the cost of moving into protected territory. Vincent sent an even clearer message to all other criminal organizations in Chicago. There were consequences for certain actions, and the attempted assassination had crossed a line that would not be tolerated. The tense peace that existed between the various factions was restored, held in place by a healthy fear of what Vincent Caruso was capable of when provoked. Months turned into years, and the relationship between Vincent and the Morrison family evolved into something unexpected. Vincent had never been the type of man to get emotionally attached. In his world, attachments were vulnerabilities that could be exploited. But there was something about Emily, about her simple courage on that crucial day, that had touched something deeply buried within him. He began to visit them occasionally, always under the pretense of checking on investments or properties, but really just to see how they were doing. Sarah Morrison remained cautiously grateful, but never truly comfortable. She knew who Vincent was. Everyone in Chicago knew, even if they didn't say it aloud. She understood that his improved life came with invisible strings attached, debts that could never be fully repaid. But when she looked at Emily, seeing her daughter genuinely laugh for the first time in years, seeing her bring home progress reports and talk excitedly about art classes and science clubs, Sarah couldn't fully regret the Faustian bargain she'd made. Emily, for her part, was too young to fully understand the complexities of the situation. To her, Vincent was simply a kind man who had helped them when they needed it, a distant father figure in a life that previously had none. She didn't understand why her mother became tense when Vincent appeared, or why the neighbors murmured when they saw him visiting their building. It was during one of these visits, 3 years after the bombing incident, that everything changed again. Emily was now 11 years old, taller and more confident, but still possessing that same straightforward moral clarity that had driven her action on that crucial day. Vincent had stopped to leave an envelope for Sarah, bonus money, though they both pretended it was something official related to work. When Emily returned from school, "Mr. Caruso!" she cried, rushing to embrace him with the careless abandon of a child who hadn't learned to fear or be intimidated. Vincent hesitated for a moment before returning the embrace, feeling strangely uncomfortable with the genuine affection. "How was school?" he asked, reverting to the more familiar territory of politely inquiring about mundane matters. Emily began to talk about a science project, her eyes shining with enthusiasm, when 3 black vans appeared on the street, stopping abruptly in front of the building. The doors opened simultaneously, and armed men wearing bulletproof vests with the letters FBI emblazoned in bright yellow emerged in a choreographed ballet of coordinated police action. "Vincent Caruso," an amplified voice thundered through a megaphone. "You're surrounded. Keep your Hands where we can see them, and slowly kneel on the ground. Any sudden movements will be treated as hostile. Time seemed to freeze. Vincent had faced many dangerous situations throughout his life, but this one was different. There was a child beside him, a child he had come to see as something close to family, and the last thing he wanted was for Emily to witness what was about to happen. "Emily, go inside the building now," Vincent said calmly, his voice firm but gentle. "Find your mother and stay with her. Don't leave, no matter what you hear." Emily looked between Vincent and the armed agents, confusion and fear waging a battle on her young face. "But what are they going to do to you?" "Get inside now," Vincent repeated, this time with more urgency. Sarah had appeared in the doorway, her face pale with terror. She grabbed Emily and pulled her inside, but not before the girl screamed one last thing. "You didn't do anything wrong. Tell them you didn't do anything wrong. If the Yari..." Circumstances had been different. Vincent might have laughed at the irony. But now, as he slowly knelt on the floor, his hands clasped behind his head, he only closed his eyes briefly and prepared for what was to come. FBI agents moved quickly, handcuffing him tightly, reading his rights in a monotone voice that had recited the same laws. "Smas palabras mil veces antes." The arrest was just the beginning.